Hi everyone! What are we talking about this time?
We're talking about personal statements and writing your college app essay. But instead of going straight into the tip, we are going to talk about what we wrote in our essays and then maybe try and get some learnings out of that to share with you guys. So yeah.
We're each going to share our essay and we're going to dissect it as if we're in the admissions committee, and then we're going to try to bring out kind of what worked and what didn't work and whatever, and hopefully there you guys will learn something just by hearing us talk about our own essays. So now let's decide who goes first. Rock, paper, scissors. Whoever wins goes first?
Okay.
Okay. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot! Damn, I gotta go first. Okay, so my essay, maybe it's to set a little bit of context. When I was in high school, I was really interested in like the hard sciences, like chemistry, physics, right? So that's kind of what I wrote my essay about. That's also what I applied to school as. So it was pretty consistent in that way. Between 10th and 11th grade of high school, I took a summer course at UC San Diego. It was about quantum physics and quantum chemistry also, which is interesting. But anyway, in there, I learned a concept called quantum tunneling. It's a little nerdy, so just bear with me. But basically, the analogy is in classical physics, like in the real world, there are certain impenetrable barriers. Like I can't walk through a wall, right? Or I cannot jump over a 100-foot wall. But in quantum physics, because of this phenomenon called quantum tunneling, long story short, you can have a particle like an electron or whatever, and if you measure where that electron is randomly and small probability, but still possible, that electron is on the other side of this wall, right? Let's say you put a wall and it literally, most of the times it's on this side of the wall where it should be, and then randomly, small portion of the time, you find it on the other side of this energy barrier or this wall. And it's only possible at the quantum level because particles are like probabilities. So there is a small but non-zero chance that you find the particle on the other side of this wall, which it should not have been able to go through. So that is the tunneling aspect of it. Actually, just a side story, if you look in like your computer, if you have like a chip, right, your CPU, which is all made up of little electrons, right? The quantum tunneling effect actually disrupts the way that your computer works. So if you like randomly turn on your computer and then you like lost data, a lot of times it's because the electrons should all be here, but sometimes they've quantum tunneled and they're over here, and because of that you lost data. Anyway, that's a side point, but I'm just letting you know that quantum tunneling is a real thing.
Okay.
But anyway, so there's this phenomenon called quantum tunneling that I learned about. And you can tell I'm still very passionate and interested in. So what I wrote my essay about was I learned about this phenomenon called quantum tunneling, and I was so interested in it because it gave me inspiration into my own life. Things that seemingly are impossible are possible, you know, and it's observed through science that there are things that you would never consider to be possible that actually do happen and are a very important part of how this world works. And in that, I drew a lot of inspiration, right? Of, wow, there's so much beauty in science, and it teaches me philosophical lessons that nothing is impossible if you try hard, right? And things like that. There's so much depth once you learn the science. So then I concluded the essay by saying, I can't wait to continue to learn more about science and continue to push the barriers of science and see how I draw inspiration into my own personal life. It's a little nerdy, but that's kind of what the essay was about. Yeah.
That's cool.
Any thoughts?
I love that it led with a story. I also love like how specific and how nerdy it is, in the sense that it's like you can totally see that this candidate has dug himself into a rabbit hole of quantum tunneling and has decided that it's like, I don't know, has fallen in love with it, you know, essentially. And so as a reader, that is a total green flag, right? This candidate has a lot of intellectual curiosity demonstrated by his understanding of quantum tunneling. But also, more than that, I can see that this candidate is one who is very deep and philosophical and who can take out of, you know, a scientific subject insights for his own life and for his own kind of reflection. And I think that that's beautiful and inspiring. So I think I would really enjoy reading that essay. Only thing that gives me pause is if that story is written down, would I be able to like understand what this candidate's talking about?
Right.
Because it's a complex thing, and if I'm not a physicist, I'm not a scientist, I might struggle and I might get lost in the middle of that explanation.
Yeah.
So I think like the challenge with a story like yours is how to make it digestible for people who has never heard of quantum tunneling. But I mean, you did a good enough job, but
yeah,
there's always a chance
right,
that people get lost.
Right.
While
Yeah,
reading.
it's a good point, because at Com, like we talked about last video, they see thousands of applications in a very short period of time. and no one is going to go open up their physics textbook to look up what is quantum tunneling. If you don't do a good job of explaining it, I think that's it. I mean, you'll have to live with the fact that no one's going to spend the extra time to really understand what you're talking about.
Right.
For me, when I wrote that essay, actually, when I think back to it, I probably under-explained it, where I basically just said, like, in the real world, you cannot cross this barrier, you cannot jump over a 100-foot wall, but in quantum physics, because of quantum tunneling, somehow you can. Like that, I just kind of left it like that, which I think is probably maybe lacks some of the nuance. So there is definitely a balance, I think, right? Like you're saying, of how do you make it understandable and digestible immediately without having to open your physics textbook? But also, how do you actually bring enough depth such that the rest of the essay works?
But show enough depth to also show your own understanding of the concept, right? Because it's easy to just kind of like
throw stuff out.
Just throw stuff out, right? Just use words and concepts just to sound cool, and the adcom can read through that. Usually, can see through that.
Right. Yeah, I think something I was also really going for in this essay was, so the context, I actually had two main essays that I used, which I'm not something that I necessarily recommend, but I just happened to have two essays, maybe for different schools or whatever. And the first essay was more traditional. I actually talked about my experience, like, I worked at a chemistry lab when I was in high school for UCLA, blah, blah, blah. So I talked about that experience, I talked about what I learned and like why I'm interested in chemistry and physics, like, kind of more straightforward. And then I had this one, which what I was going for with this quantum tunneling essay was really talking about something that only I could write. And it's unique, only this person could write about because of the way that he thinks or he sees the world or whatever. And so do you think, from your experience, do you feel like that's a pretty unique essay and I achieved my goal of like writing something that is uniquely mine?
I think so. Especially like knowing who you are now, knowing your personality. I think it accurately depicts who you are as a person. Jesse's like you're a very like quantitative-minded person.
Okay.
He's very mathsy. But yeah, so Jesse loves physics, maths, and all that type of stuff. But also all that stuff. But also you're very deep and philosophical and reflective. And so I think that essay captures all of you really well. But, the adcom doesn't know you or didn't know you like I do.
Sure.
So what I would want to ask is, as you were saying, just kind of like the rest of your application, what does that look like? Make sure that, this is not just some guy, who's just really good at creative writing.
Right.
Creative writing.
Yeah, I think the rest of my application probably helped. I think there was an opportunity to show a little bit more personality. If you took away my essay, I think that my application, the risk would be that it would be a little bit more stale. Because I think it was a lot of like my extracurriculars. It's not like I did something very, very unique. Like I volunteered at some places, I worked in that lab, and then I got good grades. But yeah, all of that paints a picture, I think, of like a smart kid who like likes physics and like does all the things that he should do. But then I think trying to incorporate a little bit of the thinking behind it and what I'm inspired by and more that philosophical element, like you're saying, I think was the risk that I took. Mm-hmm. We'll never know if it was the best possible bet that I could have taken, but it worked out well enough. But that was the strategy and the thinking behind why I chose that approach. So
yeah, that's a good balance. I can see how you got into those schools.
Yeah, trying to find a little balance. Okay. Anything else, Miss Adcom?
No, I think like to be able to give more feedback, I would have to actually read your essay, right?
Yeah.
And make sure you told that story well.
Right. Because telling it in a concise, authentic, good voice, that also matters a lot. I mean, that's also a huge part of it, of course. Mm-hmm. Okay, your turn. You're gonna talk about your UK application essay?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about my UK application essay. So for my UK application essay, and if you guys are familiar with UCAS, you know that you are writing one essay for all of the UK schools, and the focus needed to have been on the major.
One main one, but there are other...
One major.
There are also other supplemental ones or no?
So you basically have to kind of be applying for similar majors because you're writing your essay on why you want to study this. So anyway, my teacher told me that I needed to show that I lived and breathed the subject. And the subject I chose was PPE. So a combination of politics, philosophy, and economics. And the story that I decided to go with was basically me learning about the world wars.
Okay.
Me learning about the world wars in history class. So before the last 2 years of high school, I had never been exposed to that. In history class, I was exposed to like ancient Greece, like ancient Egypt, like kind of like that type of history. And this was the first time that I was exposed to, I guess, like more like modern day history, if that makes sense. And we looked into World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. And instead of like actually thinking about, oh, this war happened and whatever, the sequence of events, I think what really struck me was just how a lot of the conflict that happened, including the death of millions of people in Europe at the time, or just around the world, was driven essentially by political ideologies and what people believe to be true. So just kind of like these small philosophical beliefs that translate into political ideologies that then translate into collective action in the part of these countries that led to then war or the intentional killing of millions of people. And that caused me a lot of distress. So I talked a little bit about that. I talked about Hitler in Germany. I talked a little bit about like Stalin, Mao, as kind of figures behind these ideological beliefs, and then also linked it a little bit to then economic consequences in these countries. And I think in that way I was trying to show the interlinkage of all these three subjects and why I live and breathe the subject and I need to then study it further. I also like quoted a lot of my favorite historians and philosophers as I was telling the story to try to show that, you know, I kind of did reading outside of school as well. So like history class was maybe the starting point, but then like I went into my own little world and read up on those things myself as well. That's the story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, what do you have to say?
Show of hands. How many people wrote their personal statement about Hitler? Cricket. Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's certainly very unique. I think people talking about their classes, talking about what their favorite classes are, talking about what they learn from classes is more common. But for you to kind of say that the reason that I love history and being able to kind of think through how a small philosophical ideology turns into a larger political impact, which presumably turns into a larger economic impact too. And kind of you as a 17-year-old, right? Going through like what is a pretty mature point of view of like thinking about what is the world that we're shaped by and what really drives that. And it's like these small political ideologies, right? And talking about, yeah, that being your worldview and that being something that you want to explore further because that's something that you find intriguing and valuable to understand. Seems like quite a unique piece. And then you said what? It's a little bit. What was the word that you used? In terms of your feeling? Yeah, distress. Like a feeling of like
uneasy. Made me feel very uneasy.
Right. I think that's like an interesting and unique emotion that you don't see very often in these essays, but does make it feel much more personal and close to you, right? Makes it feel like it's a emotional and personal topic for you. So, assuming that you pulled that off pretty well, I think that makes for like a pretty dynamic and interesting essay.
And I think like I could have written a story about my extracurricular stuff. Because I had done a lot of like films and I was like working on my album then and all that. So I had kind of these maybe interesting things that I was doing on the side as well. But I guess my question to you as an adcom is like, how would that have landed if I had chosen to write about my artistic side?
Was there a space in the application where you did talk about those things at all? Or not talk about, but at least list them?
In the case of the UK application, I could list them in my resume, or they have room there where you could talk about your extracurricular activities separately.
I think if you ask me, I think I have two thoughts, right, in general, as if I'm sitting in the shoes of AdCom. I think if you focused your story around kind of your film and singing career, I think one is, I'm not saying that it's overly flat, but it is a slightly more one-dimensional story. And that one dimension might not be what they're looking for. We don't know for sure. So I think it's a slightly higher risk play. But it would be a slightly more one-dimensional story. Like, that's what you would expect. If you're Maudy, and if the AdCom knew that, then they would expect someone to write about, oh, I was in these things, and I'm this, and that, and I'm pretty accomplished in these ways, and whatever, and that's what they would expect.
But also, just FYI, like, the Maudy then was just like, my academic performance was still my life. Right. And like, they would have been able to see that, just because I'm like someone who goes to school, right? But anyway, yeah.
That is a slightly flatter, not that that's a bad thing, but slightly less multi-dimensional than what you did end up doing. And then two, I think, is maybe more importantly, if you're the AdCom who's sitting in Oxford or wherever, you might not fully have a good sense of what it means to be like, hey, I was in 5 films, right? And these are the movies and this is what Like
Yeah.
I might not know what that means. Those
Yeah.
might be like really small indie films that might not be like it's
Yeah.
hard for me to know how serious
The
that is.
scale.
Like is that just like you? Oh, I like film, so like I was in my school's production of
Yeah.
Wicked or whatever, right? Is it like that, or is it like global hit? Like I don't really know, and it's kind of your job to like tell me, I guess. But the reality is that I'm like a 50-year-old guy in Oxford sitting there. I might not ever really know. So I think that there's a little bit of that. But I think the way that you did your essay shows some interesting dynamicism or multi-dimensionalness, right? Like you have good grades. Yes, you could have focused all your time around, oh, I did theater and I did film and I did music and whatever. But then instead I'm gonna write this like brooding, like kind of dark, distressed essay about how is it possible that one small ideological difference between world leaders can create like Hitler and create this world that we're in now, right? Like, it's just like a very interesting and dynamic essay in that way, I guess, and it adds something to your application.
Profile.
Yeah, to your profile.
Yeah.
And I think that that's
think
quite
so. That's
interesting.
okay.
I think that, yeah, I mean that's if you're lucky, right? And that's how they see it. There's also a chance that like better if you focus on one thing. It really depends on the profile, right? But given what I know and given I think what your application was like, I think it was probably quite a good move to write about what you did.
I think like what we can take away from both our essays is I'm realizing that we have a similarity in the sense that we went quite specific. We highlighted like something like a very particular issue or topic that we found really intriguing or that really moved us, and then that kind of led to an overall reflection and insight on how maybe like the world works or how we want it to work, or that was kind of like the flow for both of us. And it's kind of like maybe an alternative approach for you guys. Like you could choose to go down that route. I think it's much more important to show passion sometimes, and don't be afraid of coming across like you're nerdy about a particular subject, because it also shows intellectual curiosity. And it's more interesting than just maybe picking up something that's a little bit more generic that everybody finds interesting. Like that's unique.
Yeah. But I think like last time you said this, but don't turn your personal statement into like a resume. I agree with you that the similarity is really like, okay, we had this little kernel of thought, this like little small moment of inspiration, and it like, let me tell you how it's like shaped the way that we see the world or whatever, right? I really don't think it has to be like that, to be clear. Just because both of our essays happen to be like that. I think there's a lot of different types of essays that work, but I think like Maudy is saying, you need to be able to show some uniqueness and some character and something personal and get them to know what's going on in your mind, right?
Yeah, so I think that's that for this video.
Yeah, hope that was interesting.
Hope that was interesting and useful,
Yeah.
Helpful to get you going on your own essay.
Like we mentioned in the last video, if you've seen that, we want to reiterate the thing that we're doing, which is
Asking you guys to, if you want, to submit your personal statement or essays for us to read, and maybe send over some feedback and thoughts. We have the link below, and we might not have time for everybody, but we're happy to read at least
a good amount.
a good amount.
Yeah. And again, this is for people who are specifically applying undergrad, US, UK schools. Yeah, and we're excited to read your guys' essays should you choose to trust them with us. And we'll try to provide as good feedback as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Okay, looking forward to read your essays. Hope this was helpful.
Okay. Bye-bye.